Thank you, Acting Deputy President. I thank Senator Singh for her contribution, because I think Senator Singh, particularly early on in her contribution, demonstrated where the Labor Party's thinking is on this when she harked back to the Whitlam era when it comes to university funding. And I'll touch on how far we've come from the Whitlam era and how far we need to go from the Whitlam era, because whilst it may have been well-intentioned, the kind of policies pursued by the Whitlam government when it came to higher education were not good for universities, were not good for egalitarianism. In fact, they were good for rich and middle-class kids, a small number of rich and middle-class kids, to get a free education on the back of other taxpayers. That was the reforms of the Whitlam era to which Senator Singh approvingly harks back in her speech. We don't want to go back there, and governments of both persuasions have recognised that over many, many years, and that is in fact how we get to the point that we are at the moment. So, Acting Deputy President, I wanted to go to the necessity for reform, the need for reform, the big picture as to why this type of reform to our university sector is important. And it's why virtually every Vice-Chancellor has gotten behind this reform. It's why virtually every serious higher education leader has gotten behind this reform, because they understand where we sit and where we look as we look forward as a nation as to how higher education will be funded, how it will be conducted in this country. We are at a very, very important moment, and that's why this reform is very, very important. So let's look at the problems that we have at the moment. There is a recognition on both sides of politics that we actually want to see more people accessing higher education in this country. That is a recognition from the Labor Party when they are in government, and that is central to the Coalition's reforms and the Coalition's agenda, to see an extra 80,000 places, extra 80,000 supported places in higher education. So we both agree that we want to see more people accessing higher education. We both, believe it or not, you wouldn't know from any of the contributions from the Labor Party on this, but from their actions in government, we know that both sides of politics actually acknowledge that there isn't a blank cheque, an endless blank cheque from the taxpayer, as we see more people coming into the sector. So if you acknowledge that you want to see more people accessing higher education in this country, and the Labor Party has said that they do, and the Coalition has policies aimed at seeing more people access higher education, more people getting supported places in higher education, if you acknowledge, as the Coalition does and as the Labor Party has in the past, that you can't give a blank cheque, that the money isn't endless, and we know that because of the savings outlined by the previous Labor government. Even the reckless Rudd-Gillard-Rudd governments recognised eventually that if you're going to have more people in the sector, as we want to see, if you're going to have more supported places, well then unless you reform the way you fund those places, you will leave a serious fiscal problem. And the Labor Party recognise that. They don't recognise that now, but they recognise that. So we actually agree, and that was their $6.65 billion in savings out of the sector. So we both agree for more places. We both agree no blank cheque. We both agree you have to make savings. That being the case, Acting Deputy President, you have to reform the system. Because if you agree on all those things and don't do anything else, then what you are absolutely ensuring is a reduction in quality. There is no other way. There is no other way of splitting this up. More students, more supported places supported on both sides of politics, not an endless amount of money from the government to continue to subsidise more and more each of those places, a recognition for the need for savings, then if you don't reform it, you get a lack of quality. And that's what the Vice-Chancellors have very clearly said. And this has been the case for a long time. This has been the case for a long time, Acting Deputy President. The way for a university at the moment, under the current system, the way for a university to make ends meet, to make their institution viable in a financial sense, is to effectively have as many students coming through as possible. As many students as you can get away with, that is the way to bring more money in. But that is not a recipe for higher quality. It is not a recipe for higher quality. In fact, it is exactly the opposite. It is a recipe for lower quality because you just jam more students into those lecture theatres. You have one lecturer and you have more students in the lecture theatre. You have one tutorial and you have more students in that tutorial. Even going back, my own experience in terms of university, HECS-funded places, not a free place, having the opportunity to go to university and to pay later on, once I was earning, to pay later on for that privilege. And I, like many Australians, didn't come from a privileged background, but I had the opportunity to go to university, work hard at school, get a HECS-funded place, choose your course, do your best, try and find a job at the end of it, and then once you're earning a certain amount, pay back that debt. That was a great opportunity for me and for countless other Australians. Those opportunities will continue to exist under this system. But even in my own experience, Acting Deputy President, I saw the limitations on this system, the way that it is at the moment. I remember tutorials, this is the Australian National University law faculty. I remember tutorials in succession law of 50 and 60 people. Now, no matter how good you are, if you've got 50 or 60 in a tutorial, you're probably not learning that much. You're probably not learning that much. And that's an example of the business model and why the business model is broken. You jam as many people as you can, you get those HECS-funded places, which are fixed, you bring in that revenue and you try and keep your costs down. And you keep your costs down by not having as many staff or by not having as much support. I mean, is that the kind of future we want for our university sector? Because as we bring in those extra places, those pressures will only grow. As we bring in, as we open up higher education to more and more, which we're all, I haven't heard anyone come in this place and say they don't want to see that. So if we're agreeing we're opening it up, that's a good thing. That's necessary for our future, that we see a more and more educated populace. And so as we open up that sector, do we want to see those people getting a lower and lower quality of education? Well, I certainly don't, Acting Deputy President. I want to see the quality improve. And the only way to do that, short of a blank cheque from the government, which is not going to eventuate, and as much as the Labor Party might pretend, they acknowledged in government that eventually there isn't enough money for a blank cheque. It has to be reasonable. We have to look at how we actually fund things better. And so what these reforms say is that we will ask for individuals who get a significant benefit from that university education, who get a significant benefit from the taxpayer. Now, I acknowledge, Acting Deputy President, and it's often put in this debate, that there are societal benefits from higher education. Yes, there are. And there are private benefits as well, significant private benefits. So what this seeks to do is to better balance who contributes for those benefits. So society continues to contribute. The government continues to fund higher education more and more. But what we are saying is that in order to deal with those funding issues and in order to improve quality rather than see quality going backwards, we are asking. In some cases, there will be a greater contribution asked for from individuals. There's no doubt about it. In some cases, I mean, Andrew Lee has said, in some cases fees will go down. We'll see what competition does. But there is no doubt, that we are asking for a different type of contribution. But if we don't do that, You know, this is what Andrew Leigh said about the result of DREG, of what the result would be, and I agree with Andrew Leigh on this point. He said the result will be better funded, more dynamic and competitive education sector. That's actually right. And the alternative is actually a not as well funded, a less dynamic, lower quality, less competitive education sector. Now, I can't believe that those who are arguing against these reforms are actually arguing for those things. They would never say that they are arguing for those things. But ask any Vice-Chancellor, except perhaps Professor Stephen Parker, my good friend from the University of Canberra, who I have a lot of time for, but I disagree with on this. But aside from perhaps Stephen Parker, and there may be some others, but I haven't heard from them, ask virtually any Vice-Chancellor in this country as to what will be the result if we don't get these reforms through, is they will say it'll be less competitive, it'll be less dynamic, and there will be, over time, a further reduction in quality. And we won't get the type of extraordinary outcomes that we would expect from our higher education sector. We won't get the kind of extraordinary things happening in our universities that we would like to see. Now, our universities do some amazing things at the moment, but the model that we have for funding them is broken. Unless someone wants to argue that we should actually now have less students accessing higher education. You know, you could perhaps make an argument. If you're going to reduce the number, you might be able to stick with the current model. That would still be flawed. But when you accept that we're increasing it, that we want to see more people accessing it, that there is no blank cheque from government, then these reforms become absolutely critical. And the downside of not doing these reforms will be that my kids and your kids and the kids of millions of Australians, as they access higher education in this country, will get a substandard higher education, will get a lower quality education. I wanted to address, and it was put again by Senator Singh and it's been put by those opposite, this idea that somehow these reforms will stop someone from a poor background from going to university. That is absolute rubbish. And even as they say it, they know it not to be true. They know it not to be true. You know, we heard harking back to the Whitlam era. As I said, the Whitlam reforms saw a small number of predominantly middle and upper class Australians, a small number, accessing universities and not paying a cent for them. Those reforms were so successful that the Labor government under Hawke and Keating had to change the system. They had to change the system. And so we see this continuum in university funding and in university policy. And we've come a long way. And while Senator Singh and parts of the Labor Party might want to hark back to the Whitlam era, we don't want to go back there. We can't. We shouldn't go back there, and we won't. And in fact, even the Labor Party doesn't argue that we do. I mean, is that their latest position, that it's going to be now free university education? Because I thought we had that debate almost 30 years ago, and I thought it was settled that that system didn't work, that it wasn't a fair system. It was the most unfair of systems. You know, we heard from Kate Blanchett saying that she got a free university education. I mean, I don't know what her background is. I think she went to a fairly good private school. You know, was it fair that the local plumber or the local cleaner was paying for her free education at university? I don't think so. I don't think that was a good system. So we've moved on a continuum since those failed policies, and we've actually improved the system over time. But it needs significant further improvement if we're going to meet the challenges of the future. It needs significant further improvement. You know, we've seen it in postgraduate studies. In postgraduate studies, we've actually seen deregulation. We don't see the same type of regulation for postgraduate as we do for undergraduate, and yet we've seen good competition in the sector. But going back to this idea that somehow there is going to be that people from a poorer background are going to be denied a university education, it is absolute rubbish. It is absolute rubbish. We saw it in the United Kingdom with their deregulation. We actually saw more people from lower socioeconomic backgrounds accessing university. Because it's not about how much income you have as you go in. It's about the amount of income you can earn as a result of that university education. That is the relevant factor. That is the capacity to pay. It's not about whether your dad is a truck driver, a brickie, a university lecturer or anything else. It is about how you go at university, how hard you work, what you make of those opportunities, and then as you take advantage of those wonderful opportunities that have been given to you through your own hard work and through the support of the taxpayer, as you go into the workforce and make a good living, then you are asked then, and only then, to make a contribution to that education. We think that is fundamentally fair. And in fact, we think the alternative is fundamentally unfair, that we don't ask you to make a reasonable contribution to that privileged education, to that ability to earn on average $1 million more than those who don't access higher education. This reform opens it up to sub-diploma, or sub-tertiary or sub-bachelor degrees. That kind of reform, we haven't seen that before. So we're going to be seeing people who are in a whole range of different sectors now who are going to have access to what many university students have had for the last 30-odd years. Surely that must be an improvement, in improving access. That is a wonderful part of these reforms. I wanted to talk briefly in the time that I have left in relation to the impact here locally in Canberra, because I actually think that these university reforms will be a significant improvement and present a wonderful opportunity for the ACT. We have some extraordinary educational institutions here in Canberra. We have the Australian National University. Notwithstanding Stephen Parker's opposition, we have the University of Canberra, which I believe to be an excellent tertiary institution. In fact, I pay tribute to Stephen Parker with the fact that he recognised some years ago that he needed to make hard reforms within his university. He inherited a bad state of books, poor management, and in fact he turned that round. I always backed him making those hard decisions. Some of those decisions were unpopular, but the likes of Stephen Parker would acknowledge that you have to balance the books, as does the coalition government. He acknowledged that within his own university and he did turn things around. But I think this will present some extraordinary opportunities. I think the ANU will grow and prosper under this, as will regional universities. But we will see the Australian National University growing, employing more people, providing more opportunities, doing even greater levels of research and greater contribution to our national life and to international advancement. But likewise, other institutions that are here, we've got the Australian Catholic University here, University of New South Wales through ADFA has its campus here. We will see other private providers coming up and increasing their presence. Canberra is well placed. This will be a significant thing for the ACT, I think well beyond. But as a parochial Canberran, this provides some great opportunities. It really does, because it plays to our strengths. It plays to our strengths as an educated city, as a city with some great tertiary institutions already, but institutions that, if we don't reform, could go backwards. They could go backwards in the next decade. And I don't want to see that, Acting Deputy President. I want to see them continue to go from strength to strength. The only way we can do that is if we reform the system. Because coming back to it, we all agree we want more people accessing it. That's a great thing. We're all working on that. We all agree there is no blank cheque here. If you agree on those things, you have to reform the system. You have to make it fairer. You have to make sure that the relative contributions are fairer. But that will see a more dynamic system, as Andrew Lee says, as the Vice-Chancellors say, as so many others do. So for all of those reasons, Acting Deputy President, I commend this bill